Good afternoon, and welcome to the ALCTS webinar on CONSER RDA Core Elements for Serials. I am Maria Pincus, a virtual member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, and I'll be your host for this afternoon's webinar. Our presenter for this afternoon, Les Hawkins, is CONSER Coordinator. CONSER is a cooperative serials program of the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, PCC. As part of his duties in the Cooperative and Instructional Program Divisions at the Library of Congress, Les has been involved in RDA course development and instruction of Library of Congress staff members. During 2012-2013, he worked with CONSER members on a CONSER RDA core element set and the development of bridge training for serials catalogers transitioning from AACR2 to RDA. Now I would like to point out a few things to keep in mind during today's presentation. GoToWebinar does not have interactive chat capabilities, but if you wish to comment during today's session using Twitter, you may use the hashtag you see on the screen. If you have any questions for the presenters, please type them into the box entitled Questions. These will be answered at intervals during the presentation and, as time permits, at the end of the presentation. Questions which remain unanswered while we are on the air will be answered offline and the responses sent to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded. You should be receiving an email with a link to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation form for the webinar within 2 days. Now, as I turn the presentation over to Les, there may be a slight delay.
Hello everyone. I hope you can see my screen now. My colleagues there will let me know if the sound is not good or if the screen is not showing. So I am going to talk to you today about the CONSER RDA core element set for serials that CONSER developed and talk a little bit about some of the byproducts of that process. And first, we'd like to acknowledge that the development of the CONSER RDA core element set is the result of many CONSER members, CONSER task groups, and PCC RDA task group members who contributed recommendations and did the research and did a lot of work that helped us put together the CONSER RDA core element set. I also would want to acknowledge the LC Policy and Standards Division staff here at Library of Congress and also my colleagues here in the Cooperative Cataloging program at LC. And the many standing committees, task groups that were formed, and also I want a special shout out to the UCLA RDA Review Group for their help in helping us put together CONSER RDA Bridge training. And I'll talk a little bit about that training material towards the end of the presentation. So my presentation today is going to cover basically some background on the development of the CONSER core RDA element set, and I want to walk you through a little bit through the CONSER RDA documentation that we've put together, give you some features and some ways that it can be used. Then I do want to touch on some of the CONSER RDA bridge training material because the material is based on the CONSER core elements, and we're right now in the process of delivering the training sessions based on the bridge training material. So I want to give you a little bit of an update, and towards the end of the session I'll just give you some ideas of where we plan to go now that we've developed some of the training material. So let's start with some definitions. You've already heard Maria kind of gave the definition of CONSER. It is the serials descriptive component of the program for cooperative cataloging, the PCC. You'll see that I'm using terms like PCC and CONSER throughout the session. I also wanted to tell you about the CONSER standard record, or give you a definition of that, because that's something that I'm going to touch on as we go through the CONSER RDA core element set, and I'll refer to that as the CSR. The CONSER standard record was an AACR2 based set of core elements for serials cataloging that was developed and implemented by CONSER in 2007. And as we'll see, when we began to develop RDA core elements, we needed to reconcile some of the practices that we had with CONSER standard record, or CSR, with new RDA practices, or the RDA context. And then also this session is really about CONSER RDA core elements for serials. And what it is you'll see this better in the documentation that I'll show you, but it is a core agreed upon set of RDA elements that are required for a CONSER record. It is the core element set, but CONSER members, anybody, in fact, any serials cataloger using the element set could always go beyond the core requirements that are in the element set. So the development of CONSER RDA core element set really began with the PCC implementation decision, the decision to implement RDA, at least the authority portion of it, by March 31st, 2013, and we're quickly heading to that authority implementation date. That decision also had big had an impact on the bibliographic description. That decision was made in 2011, and there it became recognized that there were many, many decisions that PCC needed to make, both in terms of planning for the authority implementation date and also in terms of descriptive cataloging. Because in RDA there are certainly alternatives that can be used. And so the questions are, should PCC as a group follow these alternatives as given in RDA, or should it be left up to cataloger judgment? There were questions about, RDA itself provides a core set of requirements, and so there are questions about, well, should PCC as a program decide to go beyond the RDA core in certain circumstances? So that's another decision. And then with RDA, we've implemented several MARC 21 fields that provide for coding elements from RDA, and there were lots of decisions of that type that best practices for coding MARC 21 records needed to be made and stated by the PCC. So a great number of task groups were put together by the PCC in 2011, and they began their work, and they really are refining the work is still continuing, that all of these elements here began to resulted in our development of the CONSER RDA core element set. I wanted to stop and take a moment to talk about the PCC decision making process with all of these task groups, and there were many, many task groups that were at work, and I thought it a good idea to talk about how decisions are made and what happens to the recommendations of the task groups. So basically what happens is that a task group makes its recommendations. Normally there is a PCC comment period that is made for the public to look at these recommendations and submit their comments on the task group report and recommendations. And then the PCC Policy Committee makes its decisions based on comments and the group's recommendations. And ultimately those recommendations get incorporated into PCC documentation, such as the LCC PCC policy statements, the descriptive cataloging manual, and other PCC program documentation. So here is, this is kind of maybe a goofy snapshot of the table of all of the PCC RDA related task groups that began in 2011, and this shows task groups up through 2012, but there are some 15 task groups that are recorded in this table just for that one period of about a year and counting, because there are 3 task groups on this table that are still need final implementation of their recommendations. But just to show you that each of these task groups has a charge, it gives a final report with the recommendations, and then the POCO or the PCC policy decisions are recorded in a what we're calling a POCO decisions table. So this shows you the large number of task groups that were at work, and one of those task groups was the CONSER Standard Record Task Group, which was charged in 2011 through 2012 to review the CSR, or the old AACR2 oriented CONSER Standard Record Guidelines, to go over those elements, and then to make recommendations for CONSER RDA, core RDA elements. And one of the important things that was kind of written into their charge was to be flexible. We're implementing a new code, and things will change over the course of time. So just putting together a list of core RDA elements doesn't mean that it was fixed in time. As we recognized at that time that our practices would change as we implemented RDA. So the final resulting CONSER core RDA elements really did represent a change from the AACR2 oriented CSR, or CONSER Standard Record Practices, that were agreed to in 2007. And that's a good thing. I mean, that's to be expected. We are implementing a new set of instructions for description. RDA has some other principles that are kind of more important for us to take into consideration: a basic principle of making decisions, the convenience of the user, the principle of representation. These are kind of new principles for us to incorporate into our descriptive practices. So so it's not surprising that that there were changes from the CSR that we followed previously. The process to reach the CONSER core RDA element set was a year-long process, and, well, let's say a year-long discussion as well. Many discussions over a year, and within CONSER to agree upon the core set of RDA elements, and to agree upon the types of changes that we were going to incorporate into our CONSER guidelines. The resulting CONSER core RDA element set was approved by CONSER and PCC Policy Committee, and of course we still are dealing with the recognition that we need to evolve as the environment changes. Wanted to mention just a couple of other set of standards that are out there. And by the way, these links, I understand that you attendees will receive a copy of this PowerPoint, and you will be able to open the presentation in slide presentation mode and be able to click on these links. But I wanted to point out that the BIBCO standard record is kind of a parallel to the CONSER RDA core element set, and it was a process that's just recently been completed to upgrade the BIBCO standard record to incorporate RDA core elements. So that's kind of a parallel set of standards, and to the degree that we can, we try to keep those in alignment. So that's one thing. And then also the provider neutral record guidelines have just recently been released for RDA, and that is another set of guidelines that we need to keep in mind and have kept in mind with the CONSER standard record, and we still need to make some changes to be in alignment with those, and I'll point something out a little bit later that has to do with the provider neutral record guidelines. So and still kind of in process, there were 3 task groups 6 PCC task groups that were put together in 2012 and made recommendations, and their recommendations are just on the verge of being finalized by the POCO, and once they are going to have an impact on our CONSER standard, our CONSER RDA core element set. We're going to need to go back and incorporate the changes that the recommendations of these 3 task groups made, and maybe more, one of these or 2 of these groups more than the other, but the hybrid record task group gives guidelines for working with AACR2 and RDA records. We may want to incorporate some guidelines from that group. The expressions and bibliographic and authority records task group may have some recommendations that will impact our CONSER RDA core element set. And then there was a task group on relationship designators, which probably will. I'm pretty certain that some of the recommendations from that task group will have an impact on the requirements that we document in our CONSER RDA core element set in terms of the type of relationship designators that are required for creators. So we're evolving, and we're going to need to continue to evolve and incorporate the recommendations and changes that come along as we implement RDA. So I'm just going to kind of summarize this background information that I've given you on the CONSER RDA core elements. The process kind of started with the PCC RDA decisions needed work. When PCC decided to implement RDA, it recognized there were many decisions that needed to be made about alternatives and best practices. So the CONSER RDA core element set grew out of that process. It also was a process that involved consultation within CONSER and the PCC and public comments to settle on a set of RDA core elements. The resulting elements were approved by the PCC Policy Committee, but as I pointed out, those core elements aren't static. They're going to need to change as our environment changes and as new recommendations and so forth are made. I might pause here after this background information just to double check to see if there are any questions that might have come up on my first portion of my presentation so far. And if there's any clarification. Hello? Yes?
Oh, I was answering if questions came up, and we don't have any questions so far.
Okay.
So everyone feel free to write in your questions at any time if you need to.
Well, I'm just taking a little pause here then, and so I'll move on to the next section of the presentation. So I'm really going to start to talk about the documentation now and tell you that it comes in 3 portions. There is a CONSER RDA core element set that's arranged by RDA instructions, and these are really broken down by the elements that are required in the description of a CONSER serial. So those identify the core elements that are required, and then we've also taken that RDA organization of those core elements and flipped it into a MARC 21 organization of the very same RDA core elements. And that's kind of a helper tool that may help some people as they make the transition to RDA. Certainly the organization by RDA instruction is very helpful in really getting the cataloger really familiar with where to look in RDA, and that's really probably the emphasis, a very important thing. But the MARC 21 tool for now is maybe a helpful tool for some people. And then the third document that I have here is kind of totally different. It's based on those courses, but it is a step-by-step guide to sitting down and creating a description of a serial based on the CONSER RDA core element set. Again, I wanted to point out that these guidelines are used in conjunction with the PCC provider neutral guidelines. They are also used in terms of working with copy. They are used in conjunction with the PCC hybrid record group guidelines that came up with guidelines for working with AACR2 records in RDA, when to convert. what elements could be added to an AACR2 record. And then also the CONSER RDA core elements are used with utility guidelines where you're putting the records in a database. Would probably have guidelines that need to be followed, and then institutions may have their local policies for RDA core elements, maybe core elements that go beyond RDA. So here are the documents, and just to give, I've put this on this slide here knowing that you will get this PowerPoint presentation and would be able to open this up into slide presentation mode to be able to click on these links, but the documents, the 3 documents, are available from the CONSER website, and there you have the information. Now, let me just step into the first document here, and this is the CONSER RDA core element set that's arranged by RDA instruction. So this is the first kind of element set that we're given, and it points out, as we mentioned earlier, an important principle in RDA is representation, which means that you're representing in certain elements, for certain elements, title statement, publication statement, you're representing what appears on the resource that you have in your hand, the manifestation that you have in your hand. And so there are an important part of RDA is following transcription instructions when appropriate. So this set of RDA core elements set uses a T in parentheses to give the cataloger a pointer to knowing that this particular element is a transcription field and that they must follow the guidelines throughout RDA for transcription for particular fields. And then the second arrow that I have here points out that this document is organized by RDA instruction, and it also gives the FRBR entity levels, and it tells you which entity you are working with when it talks about a particular RDA element. And then the final arrow there gives, there's a column that gives the whether the element is core for CONSER, core if in certain situations, it's core if it's there, or whether it is an element that's not required. Okay, so this is just another screenshot from the CONSER RDA core element set, just to show you how it's laid out, showing you the title proper there with the T for transcription. So title proper from the manifestation is a transcription field, and you need to use the guidelines for transcription, instructions for transcribing data elements for the title proper. I wanted to point out also the practices that we have here for variant titles are given, and this document is the core set of RDA elements, but it also includes some of the decisions that we made with the previous CONSER standard record practice. So this document really melds together our decisions on CONSER core RDA elements, and it also carries over our CONSER standard record practices. And in this particular case, I just wanted to point out the CONSER standard record practice for recording initialisms and acronyms that appear in conjunction with the title proper on the same source. The full form is chosen as the preferred title proper, and the initialism or acronym is recorded in a 246 field. That's just, instead of recorded both in a 245 and a 246, just recorded, the initialism is just recorded in the 246 field. Similarly, with parallel titles, if a parallel title proper is recorded, it's just recorded in the 246 field, and that's just kind of a carryover from our CONSER standard record practice. Again, this is an area for describing the requirements for type of extent, and this also continues CONSER standard record practice, or CSR practice. That extent was only required for tangible non-print formats, unless the resource was complete. We're going to change this requirement a little bit because of the provider-neutral record guidelines. I mentioned a little bit earlier that it's important for us to be in line with other guidelines such as the provider-neutral record, and the provider-neutral record guidelines are aimed at creating a description of online resources. And one of the recommendations, or one of the requirements in the provider-neutral record guidelines are that for all online resources that the type of extent one online resource be given. And so we haven't included that here. We're going to need to change that. So CONSER is going to need to update its requirements here with type of extent to include one online resource for the online serials that contributors describe. So I just wanted to point that out with this screenshot. Okay, so I've just kind of covered what the first organization of the CONSER RDA core elements. It's organized by RDA instruction, and it gives you, as you see on this slide, it gives you an indication of the FRBR entity level. Now I'm going to talk about the document that organizes those same elements into a MARC 21 to RDA core element set. And so it is, if you see in the left-hand column, it is organized by the MARC encoding. Gives the element, the RDA element and the RDA instruction number. Also notes the required, the core if or not required status of each element, and also provides notes for coding the MARC 21 element. Here's another screen from this MARC 21 to RDA element set, and I just circled this, the 130 here because this, I mentioned that the CONSER RDA core element set made some changes from the CONSER standard record, and one of those changes was to begin following, again, the requirement to distinguish an authorized access point for a serial that is the same of another work with that same authorized access point. So in other words, if a record or a description of a serial is to be entered under, is to if the work's authorized access point is the preferred title, and that preferred title is not unique, and then the 130 field will be used to code a unique authorized access point. That was something that the CONSER standard record kind of did away with, but we are now going back to that practice of creating a unique authorized access point if the description of the serial does not have a creator in the description. And then I wanted to point out something else that we actually did carry over from the CONSER standard record, and that was the requirement for recording the statement of responsibility. We don't require that in the 245 subfield C in recording the statement of responsibility, but we encourage catalogers to record that statement of responsibility in other fields. A 550 field is a good place to set up a pattern for recording statements of responsibilities that appear on a serial. The reason we did that is because very often statements of responsibilities that appear on the first issue end up not appearing or have different statements that appear on later issues. And so in terms of helping identify the work, we think that recording those statements of responsibility to show usage should be done using a note field rather than the 245 subfield, and that was a practice that we carried over from the CONSER standard record. And I'm just showing you that that's incorporated into this RDA core element set. And then each of the flavors of the RDA core elements set also includes description of the new MARC 21 fields that came along at about the same time of RDA, and there are instructions. So here's an example showing the 264 field for the publication statement. So that was just kind of an overview of the MARC 21 to RDA core element set. It's got the same elements as the RDA instruction organized document, but it's just in MARC 21 order. Now I'm going to talk about the other tool that we have, which is more of a workflow, and it's what we call the CONSER RDA cataloging checklist, and it's meant to be something to walk a cataloger through the description of a serial, and it is really aimed at for use with for textual serials. It's used in conjunction with the element set, and all of the instructions here are based on the RDA core elements. The documentation is really aimed at experienced serials catalogers, and it's kind of a transitional document to help catalogers who are familiar with AACR to move into RDA. And it is based, it's used in the MARC 21 environment, which we currently are, and we're implementing RDA with ISBDA punctuation in MARC 21. It's used in conjunction with RDA instructions and the CONSER record guidelines that we have. And we also wanted to acknowledge that this document is kind of modeled off of documents created by LC. LC had a checklist for creating RDA records for its staff. We also were influenced by the workflow documents created by University of Chicago and Stanford University. So it's based on some existing models. It starts out with a getting started section, and it starts with some of the basic decisions that we've always had to make in creating a description of a serial. Is it a serial? First question. And it points to the guidelines in RDA for making those decisions. Then there are things that outside of RDA in terms of, is there already a description available in the database, and what decisions do you have to make about that, and if there is a description, does a new record need to be created because of a change in the serial? So it takes you through that decision process, and to aid the cataloger, we've included a decision tree. So this shows the decision process. First is the resource of serial. It points you to the appropriate LC PCC policy statement for making those decisions. Then if it is a serial, is there a record available or a description already available in the database that you're using? And then there's the need to decide whether or not, if you do have a description, is a new description necessary because of a title change, for example, or can you work with the existing record and just simply update it because of a variant title, for example. And then there are some general editing instructions, and I've already pointed out that these documents contain hints, little highlights for when certain elements need to be transcribed, and points to the guidelines in RDA for transcription, and gives information about supplying information if needed. The organization of the document is roughly FRBR and RDA instruction, although I have to say that the RDA instruction order, or FRBR order, I have to say it kind of starts out with the manifestation and then moves to the work. So it's kind of in reverse order of WEMI. There may be better ways as we evolve to kind of change that organization. We may want to think about that organization differently, and maybe think about it in terms of a more strict FRBR type of organization. I wanted to say a couple of things, that these Documents, the CONSER RDA core element set organized by RDA instruction and the MARC 21 flavor of those core elements, and the cataloging checklist are available freely on the CONSER website. They are also posted in RDA Toolkit. The two core element sets are posted as global maps, so you should be able to find them there. And then the checklist is posted as workflow. It's amenable to being a workflow and is similar to some of the workflows that are already there. The workflow itself links out to the core element set, and there are links between the tools. So it's available on the CONSER website. It's also available in the RDA Toolkit. And so here's just a quick look at the cataloging checklist for textual serials as it appears in the RDA Toolkit. And of course, you're familiar with how to get to the workflows and the maps using the Tools tab over in the left-hand corner of the toolkit, and then you'll see workflows, and under that you'll see maps. So the cataloging checklist is available as a workflow, and it links out to the other two documents. So the core elements have been the basis for our being able to develop our bridge training, which we're kind of in the process of right now. We're transitioning CONSER and other PCC catalogers from AACR2 to RDA for description of serials. Kind of our next steps would be to update CONSER cataloging manual based on our CONSER RDA core element set, then to think about an SACTB type or more extensive RDA serials cataloging workshop maybe in the future. So to summarize what I've talked about in terms of this documentation, we have incorporated PCC decisions from many task groups and the ongoing work of many groups within PCC. We've also been able to document CONSER decisions, carry over some of the CONSER standard record practices, and incorporated them into our new documentation. Then the cataloging checklist that we have, we think is going to be a useful transitional tool for catalogers, experienced catalogers moving from AACR2 to RDA as a decision-making tool. And just to make the point that these are available from the CONSER homepage and are also available in the RDA Toolkit as maps and a global workflow. So I'll just pause. Hello, yes.
Now we have a couple of questions. I wondered if you wanted to take them now or wait till the end.
Sure. If they're easy, I can answer them now. If they're harder, maybe I'll answer them later. So what do we have?
We have, what are the projected environmental changes that RDA will adapt to? Ray, background presentation.
Yeah. Okay. So you know, I think that I mentioned that we need to be able to respond to I guess I did say environmental changes. I guess what I was thinking of is as we move into implementation of RDA and we've made certain decisions about what fields or what we require as core, I think we'll need to be flexible. We may need to see that we will need to maybe make some different decisions. So for example, the relationship designator task group has made a recommendation that that any authorized access point for a creator in a record have a relationship designator associated with that. Right now, that's not a requirement, but when that recommendation, we think I think among CONSER we think that's a very good thing to do. That'll be something that we'll need to adapt to. We'll need to change our documentation and our requirements to require that that relationship designator. That's just kind of an example.
Somebody wanted the question to be repeated. The question was, what are the projected environmental changes that RDA will adapt to? For example, background presentation. I don't think you need to repeat the answer, but somebody wanted the question to be repeated.
Yeah, and I understand why they asked it that way, because I kind of said that there was an environmental issue, but I was focusing on the fact that we'll have to update our CONSER RDA core elements set as we begin to implement RDA for various reasons. Anything
So
else?
another question we have is, are the CONSER cataloging manual and CONSER editing guide Are the CONSER cataloging manual and CONSER editing guide being updated for RDA?
I've got a specific slide that I'll talk about that, and I'll give you some information on that in just a few minutes. So I'll hold on to that question. How about that?
Okay, and some other have been popping up. When will the new CONSER cataloging manual and CONSER editing guide be issued? I guess it's more or less.
I'll tackle that one too.
Okay.
Just in a few minutes.
And I have here that it would be easier to understand if you, Les, repeated each question. Your audio seems to be coming through better. So I don't know, when I ask the next questions, maybe you can repeat.
Well, okay. Okay, well, let me just repeat the two questions. The one question that you already had. There was a question about the CONSER editing guide and the CCM, and where are we in the process of updating those documents. I'll have some information for you a little bit later in some of our plans. So I'll spend a few minutes in just a few minutes talking about that. I've got that on my slide. So those were the two questions. Maria, were there other questions?
No, that's all we have.
Okay. Okay, well, that's good. Well, then I will certainly tackle those two questions, and I'll talk about them in this section here. So I wanted to talk about the CONSER Bridge training material that we've developed, and I'm very excited about it. It is based on the CONSER RDA core elements that we've put together. We have been using this material here at LC. It's a 4 to 6 hour session. Made up of PowerPoints and some supplemental materials that we have. We began using it with LC serials cataloging staff in the summer of 2012, and it has been evolving. We've handed it out to various of our PCC trainers that we know of, and it's been delivered in online format, even to non-PCC audiences throughout the fall. And we've given it over to the UCLA RDA review group. That's why I mentioned them early on in the session, to acknowledge their contributions to developing the CONSER RDA Bridge training material, because they really did kind of test it and experimented with it and gave us some great exercises. So it's something that's been evolving, and we've been using it in various venues. It can be used in a face-to-face environment. We gave a training session for 45 people from various CONSER institutions in January 25th, 2013. Gave that in a face-to-face session. We are currently right now giving it to CONSER and PCC members in online sessions. We've set up a couple of sessions in February and a couple of sessions in March to deliver the material. I got to say that the basis for it really came from the models that we saw for the NACO training and some of the other LC training plans, where there were certain prerequisites that are very important to build a basic understanding of RDA in terms of knowing FRBR and going through a step-by-step process. So we've looked at the NACO transitional training material and sort of built on a similar plan. Also used LC's training plan for its staff to build this material. And I wanted to say that it could be used by PCC and non-PCC institutions. There are PCC decisions in the document throughout it, throughout the training material, but it could be used by non-PCC institutions for training staff who need to go from a CR2 to RDA. So that material is freely available. We'll make it freely available on the website right now. We have it down because we are doing some adjustments to it, but it will be freely available in the near future on the CONSER website, and it could be used by by anybody. And then just for PCC members, there are certain assumptions that before they're going into the Serials RDA Bridge training that they already have their RDA NACO training in place. I mentioned that there are FRBR is an important component to getting a good foundation in the descriptive cataloging and name authority cataloging in RDA. So we actually request that the people who are attending the sessions take the FRBR prerequisite material that we have available. It comes from LC's training site. And then there is other training material available from LC's site, which we point people to because it's very good in terms of getting a good background and handle on descriptive cataloging. As I mentioned, we've given the material in several face-to-face sessions here at LC. It's been given in other venues. We held a session for a large number of people in January 2013, and we've got sessions right now for PCC and CONSER members scheduled. We just finished a series of 3 webinars in February. We're beginning to start up another series of 3 webinars tomorrow. And then we've got 2 series scheduled for March. So we can go through the bridge training material in one series. And what I mean by one series of online sessions is that it's made up of 3 webinars where we get through the material. Actually, we haven't been able to get quite through all of the material, but so we may need to think about expanding the time that we spend. So we're kind of in the process of exposing CONSER and PCC members to the training material. And just to tell you a little bit more about it, what we get from giving these sessions is that it gives us an opportunity to get new ideas from people. People who attend a session always give us new ideas. They ask great questions that we hadn't thought about before, and we go out and find answers for those, and it helps us develop our material. One of our goals of developing this material was to make sure that we had a common understanding of how we're implementing RDA for the description of serials in our RDA cataloging practices. And we also wanted to make this material freely available for PCC and people who aren't part of the PCC. We think they might find it useful for their own staff training. Sort of excited about how we're delivering this. We're making use of an online learning platform that LC right now has, and it allows us to support communication with the people who attend the sessions. We can give the prerequisite links to the prerequisite material through this platform, give them links to documents that they need to have. There is also a discussion board feature of this document, and it's kind of all, this platform was used for training our LC's overseas offices, and my colleague Hian Nguyen was instrumental, was the primary person to put it together, and we've kind of used that model for the CONSER bridge training. And I just wanted to show you a couple of screenshots from that online platform. It provides a place for us to give links to the prerequisite modules and other additional helpful links, a place to talk about how we want to do CONSER peer review. And then it's just kind of an informational place. We can give links to quizzes that we've incorporated. We have online quizzes as part of the sessions, and we can give those links and we can give the results to those quizzes. So it's kind of interesting to be able to use this online platform as part of the training sessions. So I'll just summarize here, and I promise I'll get to the question about the CEG and the CCM in just a moment. But for the bridge training material, yeah, it's focused on getting people who are familiar with AACR2 into being able to create a description for using RDA for serials. The material can be given in face-to-face or online formats, and as I mentioned, it evolves as we give the material and need to make changes. The purpose, of course, is to solidify our common understanding of how we're implementing RDA for serials description. And then I pointed out that the material will be available freely for anyone to use. Okay, well, let me let me kind of jump into our next steps because there were questions about the CONSER editing guide and the CONSER cataloging manual and where we are with those processes in terms of updating them and making them available. The CONSER editing guide contains, it's kind of a serials MARC 21 bibliographic formats type of tool. It provides also instructions for CONSER catalogers working within a shared database in terms of how to play nicely with the records, when to upgrade certain records, and it just has certain guidelines. And we will need to update that material as soon as we can. We have not begun to update it. There is a lot of it that stands, will stand as it is because it doesn't necessarily have to do the implementation of some of the MARC fields for serials. Some of those decisions haven't changed under RDA, so there's probably a lot that will be able to stand as it is in the CEG, and it's certainly usable for making some of the coding decisions, although we recognize that we'll need to make some of those changes. Similarly with the CONSER cataloging manual, there's a lot of great advice in the CONSER cataloging manual that doesn't have to do with AACR2 or RDA instructions. There's advice about handling serials, and it gives you information about the features of serial publishing and the features of serials numbering, and a lot of that hasn't changed. I mean, that is unique to serials, and so there's a lot of good information there in terms of making decisions about whether what you have in your hand is the same thing that's reflected in the catalog record that you find in your database. So there is a lot of good information there, and in fact RDA doesn't necessarily explicitly tell you about some of those decisions, and so some of the decisions in the CONSER cataloging manual still stand and are still valued. What we wanted to do was first develop our CONSER RDA core element set, and that's in place. Of course, it changes as time goes on, as implementation goes on, but we do have a core element set that we can work with. We wanted to get people into making RDA descriptions for serials as soon as we could, so we're using that bridge training material as that next step. So really our next steps with the documentation, the CEG and the CCM, are to begin to think about how to update those in kind of an RDA format. And there are two portions of the CONSER cataloging manual: the instructions on cataloging online serials and the instructions on describing integrating resources that have been recently reviewed by a couple of PCC task groups, and there are recommendations in place, a whole set of recommendations for how each of those modules could be redone for RDA. So I think that's kind of the path of least resistance for us to go ahead and update those two modules first. So that'll be what we have our eyes set on for the CONSER cataloging manual, and hopefully we can begin some of that work on updating both of these documents in the summer of 2013. Then again, we'll also want to think about a little bit further in the future. Maybe we can do the documentation sooner, summer 2013. And we might want to think about how we develop a more extensive training package for describing serials with RDA and how that might be managed. But that's a further step. So just to kind of summarize the entire presentation I've made here, I hope I've made the point that our CONSER RDA documentation is freely available, and we encourage you to take a look at it and use it if you can in your institution. And it may be useful to people who are institutions that aren't part of PCC. Have a look and see what you think. And then we will also be making the bridge training material available. Feel free to use that for local staff training. And that's really all I have. And if there are any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Les, we don't have any additional questions. If anybody has any now at the end of the presentation, someone wants to type it in, but you've answered the two that we had so far.
Okay.
Okay, so whenever, wait, yes, we got one. Yes, we got a question. It says, more than one, no, it says, when will training materials be made available to non-CONSER libraries?
We will be posting, we are still in the process of updating our training material for the serial session.
Excuse me, remember,
yes.
I wanted you to repeat the question.
Yes, the question was, when will the PCC Bridge training materials be made available freely on the website? I expect within a month or so. We are in the process of kind of going through an intensive period of giving the material in February and March, and we really want to post it when we have it finalized. And so we're still kind of in the process of tweaking it and putting it in slightly different formats. So I'd say within the next month or so it'll be available from a link on the CONSER website.
And another question, oh, this is very related. It's practically the same one. How will we know when new materials SCCTP training will be available?
We aren't planning for a full-blown SCCTP. The question was, how will we know when SCCTP training material is available? If we make more extensive serials description training material available, we would post that through the listservs, and I'll make a note to myself, even when we do post the bridge training material, that I will post that information of its availability through beyond the PCC email list. So I will make sure to hit the familiar cataloging email list with that information.
We have just been assigned a BIPCO monographs reviser. Plans for a CONSER reviser?
Yeah, we are. The question was, we've just been assigned a BIPCO reviser, and so are there plans for CONSER reviser? Yes, we are talking with the people who are going through our training sessions right now and giving them a sign-up form for deciding what type of review that they would like. We've heard that there are a couple different models that they would like for review. Some institutions have just already set up an exchange of records relationship with another institution, and they've just already begun to share records. That kind of happened organically. But there are others where we want to be able to pair up experienced reviewers with the reviewees, and so we're just now collecting information about who would be available for review and who needs to be paired up with the reviewer.
Okay, well, I think that's what we have for now, and thank you so much. If I can get I think we can change the presentation to our closing screen.
Yes.
All right. So this has been a very interesting overview of the serials cataloging and training tools. Thank you again, Les. We want to thank also each of you for attending this webinar today. Please take a few minutes to fill out the brief evaluation form that you will receive online and return it to us. Your comments and suggestions will help the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee plan future continuing education offerings. Also, if you have an idea for a webinar, feel free to submit a proposal using the online form found on the ALCTS website. ALCTS offers an array of online learning opportunities. On the screen, you can see the upcoming webinars in our regular webinar series, as well as another offering in the RDA series. Programmatic changes to the LC NACO authority file for RDA to be held in May. In addition to the webinars, ALCTS offers the Fundamentals series web courses, web-based courses of 4 weeks duration on a variety of subjects. The next 3 courses, beginning in February 25th and March 4th, are sold out. Fundamentals of Collection Assessment, Fundamentals of Electronic Resources Acquisitions, and Fundamentals of Collection Development and Management. but they will be offered again at later dates if you're interested. However, we do have still spaces for Fundamentals of Acquisitions, March 11th to April 5th, and Fundamentals of Preservation, March 25th to April 19th. The CE Committee also schedules e-forums on a monthly basis that have become very popular. ALCTS members as well as non-members are welcome to participate in these forums. These are free. Please visit the ALCTS website for details about all our continuing education offerings. As we conclude this afternoon's broadcast, I would like to thank Jackie Samples, member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee's Technical Support Subcommittee, as well as Julie Reese and Vicki Gruzinski of the ALCTS office for their assistance. Once again, on behalf of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, I thank each of you present here today. We hope that this webinar has been of interest to you and look forward to welcoming you at another ALCTS webinar in the future. Good afternoon. Thank you.